The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales radio show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
And hello, my name is Charles Christian, and welcome to another Weird Tales radio show. Thank you for joining us, and our main item this week is going to be an interview with Naomi, the owner of Inanna's Magical Gifts in Norwich, which is a fascinating little shop full of books and gifts and really lovely stuff, all to do with folklore, magic, Wicca, mythology, fairy tales. And I say I'm intrigued because it's now been going for over 30 years, which is good going for any shop in these troubled times, and it has built up an international reputation for its content. So it's a fascinating insight onto what makes people go into running a shop of this type, what skills do they have, what interests did they have, and so on. But before we get on with that, I've got a date for you. Yes, it is the 24th of April is the date, which is St. Mark's Eve. Now, this used to be quite significant for a little practice, I think it was only in England it went on, called porch watching, where the idea was that anyone who was going to die in the parish in the coming year, they would file into the parish church at midnight on St. Mark's Eve. And so people would go there and sit behind a grave or in the porch or somewhere out of way to see if they could see the ghosts, spectres of those who are about to die over the coming 12 months coming into the church. There was also a variation that those whose spirits were seen, I suppose they would be doppelgangers, whose spirits would be seen entering the church but then came out again, were people who would have a serious illness during the coming 12 months and survive. So there you go, porch watching on the 24th of April. In fact, I did that at a St. Mark's church up in Leeds when I was a student up there, and we sat in a cold porch and saw nothing. But it was bitterly cold, and we subsequently learned that the church had closed and was no longer taking burials. So that will probably explain why, if there were any ghosts going around that day, they weren't coming through our churchyard. And now the interview. I'm talking now to Naomi, who runs the Inanna's Magical Gifts shop in Norwich, and Naomi can correct me on this, but you've been here for what, 25?
Oh, 88 was when I opened, so it's 31 years now.
31 years. Because I recall you used to be the other end of the street.
But if you want to go right back to the very, very, very beginning, it's not quite medieval times, but almost. I began in two tables in an indoor market, was there just briefly for a few weeks, and then moved to a wonderful medieval shop on Magdalen Street.
Yes.
Was there for a couple of years, and then moved into the Royal Arcade. That's where many people remember the shop being. I mean, we were in the Royal Arcade for about 13 years, and we've now been in this site, another beautiful medieval building, a weaver's house, still with its original window and lots of other lovely features. We've been here for 13 years now. So it's been a bit of a journey around the city in some ways, but my original dream, and I mean that quite literally, my original dream of owning the shop and its name and its contents and how it smelled and how the music sounded and how it looked, the closest to that dream is this space. Right. And I'd loved this space for a long time. I'd known it as other shops. And it was just very random, good fortune that I was offered it and was able to take it. So,
when you say the name, for people who aren't familiar or haven't got a dictionary to hand, what's the background of Inanna?
Well, Inanna was a Middle Eastern goddess, Sumerian, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Mesopotamia and Sumer, now what is largely Iraq and Iran. And she was a queen goddess. She was a royal holder of the power of the land. And there are many tales and songs and stories and carvings and jewellery and images of her in many forms. But she is perhaps best known for a journey to the underworld to meet her shadow self, her dark sister, and a return 3 days later. So, in effect, she died for 3 days and was then resurrected, something that comes up quite a bit with a few other gods and goddesses.
Yes.
And so the story of her journey and this self-exploration that it involved and this return then to the above world and her reconnection with her husband and the tales of her queenly rule have come down to us and are still being discovered and excavated and translated from many sources found in the Middle East. And the name came to me in a dream, complete with a visual of the shop and whole descriptions of things that I then wrote down in a mad, frantic moment of scribbling. And within a month, I'd opened as Inanna's Festival, as it was then, which was the name that I remembered, which is still the name over the top of the shop frontage. But many people began to think that this was an event, Inanna's Festival, and that they might have missed it.
Yes.
And so gradually over the years, I began to modify it, and now on most web material, it's Inanna's Magical Gifts.
Yes.
And that explains a little more of what we actually carry.
What is the website address just for?
It's a very dreary old website which I long to update with one of these new whizzy template ones, and I'm going to get to do it one of these days. The website is inannasfestival.com.
Yep.
INANNAS festival, all one word, .com. But I hope to reinvigorate it with something at some point. But the Facebook page is Inanna's Magical Gifts.
Yes.
And that's where there's a lot of stock and links and fun connections with other groups and people. So that can be found as well.
Yeah. What was your, I suppose, driver for opening a shop like this? I mean, it's a niche within a niche specialist shop, and in a time when people are saying, I mean, even when you first opened, that times are hard on the high street.
I opened the year of a big recession. It was 1987 that I had been working in publishing, having prior to that been in a theatre company for some years. I'd written a great deal for different magazines. I'd done some local radio and work as well. And my thought was that I would continue to, not to perform, because I knew that wasn't where I wanted to try and fight my way into that profession, but perhaps to work in an art centre or a theatre, or perhaps to work in publishing or journalism of some kind, perhaps for an in-house magazine, as I had been. But everything kind of blew up in 1987, and for anyone around at that time, it was the hugest shock to see hundreds of businesses just crumbling to dust overnight, and everything seemed so uncertain and so chaotic. And I had been working very happily in this company, doing a health and fitness magazine. I travel up and down the country interviewing people who were trying to improve their health and well-being and turn what were sometimes dreary little stories into highly entertaining and amusing anecdotes and write them up for this magazine. And I would do this with the hugest amount of irony, because I would be put up at Trust House Forte chain, also now demise,
Yes.
and avail myself of their substantial breakfast buffet, and then go and interview all these people about their weight loss and their health and well-being. Anyway, it was a huge company, and it literally fell to bits in 87. And I spent about half a year thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do. What am I going to do? I was doing that. I'm not doing that anymore. What am I going to do now? And what was strange was that all the things that I'd thought I wanted to do before, effectively marketing, PR, I just didn't feel it anymore. And I spent about 6 months really drifting. I did some temp work, I did bits and pieces for people, I helped people out here and there. And one of the things that I did was I ended up working at a friend's jewellery shop. I became a Saturday girl and then kind of helped them do holiday cover. And I really liked it. I liked helping people find a pretty thing for themselves or a gift for somebody that they cared about. I loved the idea that they were leaving feeling uplifted and pleased that they'd found something. I went to stay with a friend. It was Beltane, May Eve of 1988. I'd spent half a year nearly just fiddling and twiddling about with odd jobs. I went to sleep that night. I woke up the following morning, the whole dream totally crystallized in my mind. The long, low window, the glow of light as evening fell, entering through the door, coming down a step or two, and being in this atmosphere of fragrance and gentle music and beautiful things sparkling and moving on shelves and catching my eye. And I woke up on her sofa downstairs where I'd been sleeping and just kind of babbled, pen, paper, don't speak. And a good woman that she was, she knew something was afoot, and she just silently handed me a piece of paper and a pencil. And you know that feeling when you're trying to hold on to the shreds and tatters of a dream.
Yes.
And it's running away from you while you're trying to say, no, wait, I want to write you down. And so with my eyes closed, trying to still imagine myself in this dream, I wrote down everything I could remember. And I do have that little scrap of pencil scribble tucked in one of my books at home somewhere. And I remembered the name of the shop was Inanna's Festival. And I put down finally this paper and pen when I'd finished. And I turned to her and I said, who's Inanna? And she said, I think she's a goddess, but I don't know very much about her. And I thought that I knew a reasonable amount about deities at that point. I'd been studying and learning and was already, embarking on a path of basically Gardnerian witchcraft with a particular direction of magical study, but I had not encountered Inanna. And so with great interest, I began to learn about her society and culture. So we're going back 2,500, 3,000 years BCE. We're looking at the cradle of civilization. We're looking at the earliest cities like Ur. We're looking at the legacy of that culture being writing, the passing on of knowledge.
Yes.
The first society that had cuneiform rather than pictogram or hieroglyph style written notation. And the more I learned about her, the more fascinated I became. And as I said, within 30 days, I'd come back to Norwich. I'd found this little indoor market. I'd managed to get a table space and begun. And the rest is history, as they say. That was 31 years ago. I can't believe it's 31 years.
Yeah.
In some ways, it feels much more compacted time. And yet in other ways, I see it and I know I could tell you something from all of those years that has happened. So I know that the time has passed. But primarily the way I know it is that the little children that I served in the late 80s now come in with children of their own. And the mums that I saw with newborns and babies are now grandparents. And that's been the joy and delight of it, is being part of Norwich and serving a community for 3 decades. And I like that aspect of Inanna very much. She was dedicated to her people. She wanted their health, their well-being, their nourishment, not only physically, but emotionally and spiritually. And the prosperity of the land and the greenness of it, and the song and the poetry that we now find, the stories that have been translated, I find all that very interesting, that somehow that is what my subconscious produced at a time when I most needed direction, and I was feeling so lost and so adrift. And there it was.
And what would you say 31 years ago, again, times are still hard in retail, what would you say is the secret of your success? Because it's I can see the prices here, they range, so it's not as if you are purely going on volume.
We're not just
prices.
Selling diamond jewellery.
You're not selling diamond jewellery.
We're not selling big expensive things all the time.
Or big
not
expensive things.
No.
Is it the fact you've been able to find suitable suppliers, or that you have a feeling for what people will like, or a combination of the two? I mean,
wow, that's a complex number of ideas and issues. No, not at all. It's a good one. Okay. I think the bottom line is, if I don't like it, I won't bring it in here. Now, most of what we have, I already own something of, because that's how I found it. A talented maker, a craftsperson working in stone or wood or bone or glass or ceramic, a creative artist whose card or art print or poster I saw and thought, wow, I love that, I have to have that. So I buy what I love and what I think other people might enjoy. There is now such a diversity in here that I would say, while not every single item might be in my own home, I feel that I would be happy if it were. My house is tinier than this shop. And so I strive for quality in whatever it is. And yes, we can have cheaper end incenses, but they must still be good. I don't want any nasty toxic joss, thank you very much. It's got to be good to breathe and be around. But we also have really gorgeous Vastu, organic, pure, beautiful incenses, which are 10 times the price, but so worth it when you have the result. Same with jewellery, pieces for £5, pieces for a couple of hundred. And I think it's a few things. If I could understand the secret of it, I'm sure I would be a far wealthier woman. But I think it's that I really love to show people what we have. And I'm happy that people browse and might buy nothing on more than one occasion. But if they come in and they've seen what we have, and we've had a chat, and maybe they've gone away with a free vegan chocolate or a little stick of incense or whatever we were burning that day, I hope it's a pleasant memory that they take with them, and thinking, oh, I must remember they do beautiful cards with mermaids on, and I know somebody who likes those, or oh, I hadn't even realised they did books on that subject, or I could buy a statue of this thing or that thing. So now we've diversified to the point that we have things that are Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Sikh and pagan. That's reflecting the diversity that Norwich has here, and the diversity that I always wanted to include, as that was the community that I grew up in London when I was a child. So I embrace that diversity. I'm fascinated by world cultures and traditions, and by symbolism and the way that symbolism overlaps in different ways around the world and through time. So I think what is lovely here is that we're very rarely empty. There's always somebody in here having a nice quiet moment or a chit-chat with us or a little mosey about looking. And often people will come back in and bring somebody else and say, look, you love moons, or you love cat things, or you like frogs and they've got cards with frogs on, or whatever it might be. And so people like to introduce people, and that's very valuable. And of course, I've embraced new technology as it's come along. These are tools that we can use. But bottom line is, I don't want to ever just be web only. I love having a real bricks and mortar shop that people can come into in the real and pick things up and look at them and have a sniff of scented candles, or have a listen to music, or have a hold of something and engage with us directly.
Yeah.
And that's very important to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you found over time that some things have come in and gone out of fashion? I mean, once upon a time, I seem to recall it always seemed to be those Native American wind catchers. Was wherever you went anywhere, there were people selling them. And then we had a phase where angels suddenly started to come in.
I remember that particularly because I hadn't stocked anything with an angelic theme before. The Native American interest, I think, again, it surprised me a little bit in the late 80s and early 90s how many people were interested. I had been to the States numerous times by that point, and I had friends living in Oklahoma and in New Mexico and in other parts of the US where I had seen locally made craft work of quality and of great beauty and skill and reflecting heritage and culture. And I brought pieces into the arcade, as we were then, the Royal Arcade, that were authentic handcrafted pieces. I did not bring in anything that was made in the Far East, imitative of the style.
Yep.
I wanted authentic pieces. And so that is what we had. And word spread that we had these pieces and bought them from good sources and suppliers. And often I would come back with a suitcase of something or ship things home. And I think partly that was because at that point it was still not terribly easy to talk about Earth-centered path in this country and to connect with an Earth-centered path far away seemed easier, I think, for some people. Many people talked about the respect indigenous tribes in the USA had for the land, their understanding of animal and bird and habits of insects and land creatures and sea creatures. Talked about their honouring of seasons and cycles and marking of ceremony with ritual and respect. And I would say to people, well, you know that happens here too. And they would say, does it? Who does that? And I would say, well, pagans of all kinds, witches, druids. Oh, witches, oh no, druids, what? I don't understand. And we would have this bizarre conversation when I would say, of the land there, of the land here. Same stuff, same ideas. No buffalo, but we are reintroducing beaver, no, bison dashing across the plains, but, otters are coming back to the rivers. But people still were remembering the bad days of the 70s and early 80s. Where people were really very fearful of openly saying, I'm a practicing witch, I'm a practicing pagan. And I think for many people, they were craving that connection with land and with season and with element and with nature. And Native American things seemed to be a way to it. And then, yes, there was a point at which, having had an enormous glass cabinet filled with beautiful things, handcrafted lovely things, suddenly I realised they weren't shifting much. And I began to bring in, because by that time I knew more people, wands, athames, goblets, pentacle patrons, statues of European gods and goddesses, runes, Nordic and Viking items, which I'd never had before. Mm-hmm. But I always wanted to keep some that was from other cultures as much as possible. And also there was a huge vogue for a while. Everybody wanted Celtic knotwork everything. Mm-hmm. I think I could have sold Celtic knotwork pattern toilet paper if I'd had it. There's a niche somebody might investigate. But again, some things ride in waves and some things are constant. And what I found now is there's no one area that I could point at and say, nobody much asks about that. Yeah. Everybody asks about something at some point, and everything goes in the end. As you mentioned, the rise in interest of angels and more, perhaps loosely Christian symbolism. It was a decision for me that was helped by a very wise woman, a healer, I would say very much coming from a Christian perspective, but one of great inclusivity and respect for other paths. And she said to me, "Why are you not carrying angels?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I mean, maybe the cathedral gift shops, it's their bag more than mine. I want to sell things that they're not selling." Mm. And she said, "They're not selling them." And I said, "Oh." And she said, "Well, don't you feel that it's just another way of connecting with sacredness for people? And if people keep coming in and saying, 'Do you have angels?' they think that you would have them. So think about that. Mm-hmm. Why would they think you would have them? Because they're not just seeing you as being pagan focused, yes, if you like. They're seeing you as including other spiritual paths with respect, integrity, honouring different traditions." And I thought, oh, she's right. and so I brought in a few little pieces, and people loved them, and we brought in a few more. And so it's gone. And then I would seek out statues of Hindu deities, Buddhas in different styles. It's become a more global connection in here. And what I've most loved is the simultaneous interest in other people's traditions that my own customers have shown. So here on this card spinner, mm-hmm, is where we often put the current seasonal themes. So having just had spring equinox and beautiful Ostara designs and eggs and flowers and hares, I now spin it round, and on the next side of this four-sided display, we have Pesach, we have Passover. Full moon 19th of April this year. Yep. And all the symbols of the matzah, the shofar, the trumpet, the dove, the wine, yep, the Seder plate with all the sacred foods and the herbs, and the symbols of the Torah. And then at the top, Vaisakhi, the Sikh festival of the new year, 14th of April this year, so just ahead of the full moon. And again, the sacred sites and the symbols of the tradition, and so on. So I love the fact that we've got Christian Easter cards on the next section, and even some with Polish greetings, as we have a very Polish large customer base, significant in Norwich. Yes. And I love the fact that people will see these in the window and think, "Oh wow, that's for me," mm-hmm, and feel welcome. I like the shop to be light and bright, not kind of dark and shadowy. Mm-hmm. I want people to feel they can look around, ask questions, reach for things when possible, and engage. Yeah. And maybe that's been part of it. Maybe that's been part of why we've managed to keep going. That and some very swift skating on my part. I certainly won't deny it's been tough at times. Yeah. I've wept bitter tears. I know my parents have panicked from time to time, and I've just about managed to kind of slide sometimes from one month to the next. The priority has been keeping on my co-workers. I feel I've made a commitment to them. I would not want to break that commitment. So I make sure they are covered, my cats get fed, and I get what's left.
Yeah.
And also my suppliers, many craftspeople, many small companies. I have striven to always ensure that everybody gets something, that I talk with them, tell them what's going on. When times have been really rough, 2000, 2001, oh boy, those were some tough years. And then again, 2008, 2009, I watched dozens of businesses hit the wall. And I would say even the last couple of years have been some of the hardest. And we just roll on. Somehow you have a passion for it when you're self-employed. No one can say to you, how many hours have you been working this week? You just get on with it. You just do it. You just think it needs doing. I stay till it's done. And, you just crack on. You just have to crack on. But when customers come in and are pleased that they've given a gift that was hugely appreciated. Young lad came in earlier today and said, my mum loved the card and the jewellery. She cried, but in a good way. Then I feel my job's well done. When people have come in and said, I passed on this thing to my bereaved friend and they were comforted, I think then it was good. We chose well together, didn't we? I said to somebody the other day, we chose well together, and she said it was just the right thing. And that's precious.
And we'll have the second and concluding part of our interview with Naomi in next week's show. And that's it. We're almost out of time. Hope you've enjoyed the show, and hope even more you'll join us next time. Now, we began the show with a saint, St. Mark, and we'll end with another one, St. George. It's St. George's Day on the 23rd of April. Now, he is the patron saint of England, and we all know the red cross on the white background flag. However, just a couple of little points to mention about it. Namely, there's no evidence that St. George ever existed. There's certainly no evidence he ever came or had any connection with England. And in fact, he is the patron saint of, I think, at least a dozen other countries around the world. And sort of ironically, given the sometimes right-wing patriotism we see in this country, he's now what we'd call a Syrian, so probably would never be let into this country if he wanted to visit anyway. But I say, that's St. George, and personally I think we're missing out on our own local saints that we have, who were genuine historical people. What about Edward the Confessor? He was a patron saint for a very short time. St. Cuthbert, St. Dunstan, St. Alban, and another popular one, St. Edmund, as of Bury St. Edmunds in Suffolk, who was a king and martyr for Christianity and was tortured and executed, basically shot full of arrows, so he looked like a porcupine, as one of the chroniclers at the time said, by the beastly Vikings. Died in AD 869. So let's hear it for St. Edmund. There are attempts from time to time to get some interest in having St. George deposed, or maybe adding another patron saint to our roster. Many other countries have multiple patron saints. Anyway, St. Edmund, think about him. 20th of November is his feast day. And that's it. So until the next time, stay well, stay weird, stay wild. Good night.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic and folklore. You can keep in touch with us online at www.weirdtalesradio.com, by email to weirdtales@icloud.com and on Twitter @urbanfantasist. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Good night.